Okay, my name's Andy Free. I'll introduce my glamorous assistant, who is not here. So that'll probably save a bit of time. So yes, East-West Rail. I'm not. First of all, I should make my apologies. I feel like an interloper in the room. I'm a signal engineer by profession, so you can boo as much as you like. But the message I would, the message I've been so heartened today to hear the multidisciplinary approach of so many of the speakers today, because to me that has always been my passion in my career. So, East-West Rail, what's it all about then? Well, the big picture for East-West Rail is the opportunity to recreate rail connections that no longer exist, to link all of those potential towns and cities that are shown on that map, and it's trying to put back a bit of the railway that was lost after the beaching era and create one of the very few and pretty much the only east-west cross-country connection south of between Birmingham and London, essentially. The project, or the whole programme for East-West Rail, is split into three major sections. And the eastern section kind of is job done to a large extent. It is the enhancements that have been going on in East Anglia really for the last 20 years, in reintroducing services that didn't run and reintroducing connectivity in that part of the railway. The western section, which is what most of my presentation is going to be about, is the bit that we're on today, and deals with the railway which has been really Sleepy Hollow for the last 20 years or so, between Oxford and Bedford. But there is also the central section between Bedford and Cambridge, and unfortunately for the overall connectivity, that rail path was lost after the beaching era, lost completely. What does the route look like on a map? Well, there's the historic route of the Varsity line, but you will notice there is a kind of a southern spur that's been added to the scope of the western section now. The western section comprises the route from Oxford through to Bedford, as I said before, but also introducing connections to Aylesbury and Princes Risborough. The central section, which has been lost, is this blue route here, and that's going to be a great deal more difficult to recreate because fundamentally the land is no longer in railway ownership. The railway was formally closed, so none of the legal powers exist from the original enabling acts, and it's to recreate that central section will be start from scratch. Within the western section, though, the red portions denote bits of railway that were still open, but the green bit is mothballed. As I mentioned, we retain certain rights. The 1846 Oxford to Bletchley Junction Railway Act, engineered by Robert Stevenson, still applies to the route, which is great. It means we've got the legal powers. But they don't tell us very much. They tell us the centre line, they tell us the limits of deviation, but a lot of the features that are on those maps are indecipherable today. And crucially, of course, what those Acts of Parliament did not convey was any kind of planning permission. Planning permission didn't exist before the 1950s, so how could they? And then there's the small matter of did the areas in the dotted lines where the railway has actually wandered outside the limits of deviation of the original enabling acts, quite significantly there because of a major landowner at the time who happened to be a shareholder of the railway that was of the railway company as it was built, and then separately the cord here at a place called Calvert, for which there's no legal authorisation ever. It was built under emergency powers in World War II, and we technically have no right to be there. Well, it appears we own the land, which is a good thing. Timeline. Okay, the colours have got a little bit confused there. Up the top here, kind of the history of the bits of the railway being opened. And in 1959, as part of the modernisation plan, closure for East-West Rail was talked about. But most crucially, was when the Beeching report emerged in 1963, it said this was a route that should stay open. Great. 1967 it closed to passengers. And in 1968 the Milton Keynes report said Milton Keynes is going to be a huge new city one day. It should have all the rail connections it should have, including what we now call East-West Rail. Despite that, by 1993 that mothballed section of the route was closed finally, and the last freight train ran. And then only 2 years later, a consortium of local authorities, I think it's 23 local authorities ultimately involved in the East-West Rail Consortium, but now about 8 prime movers, was formed to try and promote the reopening of the railway. And it has taken from there, it took them 15 years through various early development to get the project off the ground again and to get, in theory, a single option developed. 2012 it appeared in the high-level output statement for CP5, and we had government backing for the project. And then 2015 we've opened the first section of that. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we have got a target for opening the rest of the western section somewhere in the range of 2021 to 23 post Hendy review. Why? Why on earth would we go to all that trouble? Well, fundamentally, there are all sorts of economic benefits. And for me, as a railway engineer, it's really nice to work on a project where I can see what the tangible big benefits of this are to UK PLC. Putting back that missing bit of railway in there links up major population centres, major centres of employment, and crucially it links together 5 out of the 6, well, potentially East West Rail as a whole links together 5 out of the 6 fastest growing towns projected over the next 30 years, which is, I find, simply staggering. And it also relieves some pressure on the road network. Within that part of the country, the roads that are highlighted on that map are those which are part of the DFT strategic road network, and the ones that are in red are in the top 10% for delays on the highways within that network. And you can see the railway there, its only parallel route is pretty much in that category. Is either a long way round or is in the top 10%. And then finally, the real measure of the growth that is going on and which we're a catalyst for. This is a map of Bicester with the houses that are projected. These are in the current planning policy for Bicester, and it pretty much doubles the size of the town. Connectivity for East West Rail is one of the big things, though. This is not just about trying to recreate journey opportunities in the near environs within the scope of the project, but connecting much further afield. This map is lifted from the East West Rail Consortium website, and it actually understates things because now it's a very real possibility that we wouldn't be talking about Reading as the western end of the route there, but actually Heathrow Airport or potentially Paddington. And of course it does link into Marylebone, Milton Keynes, cross-country services to the north of Milton Keynes and to Bedford. When the project got the support of government in 2012, the DFT though looked at it and said, great prospectus from the consortium of local authorities, but you haven't been ambitious enough, because you put back connectivity that is potentially so important to the network. So we'd like you not to look at your train service specification that you were looking at for the consortium, but actually to make sure that whatever you do is future-proof. So it deals with an incremental train service specification for potentially the first 35 years of the route operation. Now each one of those lines represents 1 train an hour of a particular service type in each direction. So the section that is currently mothballed from there to there actually becomes potentially one of the busiest sections of the route. So the core outputs, in addition to those train paths, are enhancement of the entire route of the route from Oxford to Bletchley, linking Great Western Main Line and West Coast Main Line via the Chilterns to at least W12. We've got an option at the moment on increasing gauge as far as Bedford for connection to the West Coast Main Line, but that needs to stand alone as a separate business case, because until Midland Main Line upgrade is implemented, nothing bigger than W8 can fit. So actually, I think it's W6 north of Bedford. There's not actually anywhere for those services to go. Route availability to at least RA10 throughout. An interesting challenge for us in developing the early part of the specification for the project was we got no journey time targets. But what we have found is the overall project business case is based on an assumption of a 100-mile-an-hour railway. So in very early doors, really early in GRIP 2, we looked at, is there any value in higher speed options? Bit difficult to weigh up the benefits side of that equation, but it turned out to be an extremely difficult thing to do, to go anything over 100 miles an hour. The width of the formation goes up because of our safety rules. The alignment just doesn't fit on the existing railway formation. Bearing in mind this started out as a 40-mile-an-hour railway, 100 miles an hour is a bit of a stretch. Beyond that, we got into needing to acquire new land along about a third of the length of the route to go above 100 miles an hour. We're to deliver an electrified route linking the West Coast Main Line with the Great Western Main Line electrification, and to safeguard electrification and gauging improvements on any other route on the other routes we work on. So any work we do has to be meeting the higher specification W12 and ready for electrification. We've delivered a new station at Oxford Parkway as part of East West Rail Phase 1. I'll talk about the phasings in a minute. We're due to deliver a new station at Winslow, which has bus links to Buckingham, which is one of the biggest towns in the country left not to have a rail link. To upgrade Aylesbury Vale Parkway station to support through journeys, and to build a new pair of new platforms at Bletchley station called Bletchley High Level with a footway link to the existing station. So the phasing of the project: East West Rail Phase 1, Oxford to Bicester and to London. I suppose we could be accused of taking credit for other people's thinking here. East West Rail Phase 1 actually started as the Chilterns Evergreen 3 Phase 2 project, and was intended to allow Chiltern Railways to be able to come off the Chiltern Main Line at Bicester, turn left and down the old Oxford to Bicester Railway and get into Oxford, originally by an independent line, and with mostly a single track railway. When East West Rail got onto the books as a project that was going to be funded, it quickly became clear that that was the wrong specification to deliver. So actually the project got renamed as East West Rail Phase 1 and has delivered a double track railway through as far as Oxford Parkway. Initially a single track shared with the upgraded layout at Oxford as part of the Great Western upgrade, but in the future this will be doubled as well through this section here. A few statistics on the bottom there. I'm not going to read those numbers out, but it's a significant project in its own right. Rebuilding from scratch a railway through about 12 miles of Oxfordshire countryside. Upgrading the line from what was Sleepy Hollow, Thames train, First Great Western commuter services used to almost push their way through the trees down the line from Oxford to Bicester at no more than 40 miles an hour and no more than 6 times a day. Today there is a 100-mile-an-hour railway, 2 trains an hour from Oxford Parkway to London, and that's been open for 3 months now, 2.5, 3 months, and Chiltern Railways tell us that the uptake has been far greater than they expected. One of the stations has passenger flows almost bang on target, actually slightly over their targets for this point, and they're really disappointed with that because the other 2 have far exceeded their expectations. It's delivered a new chord and about just short of a mile of new railway linking the that route to the Chiltern Main Line. And as I said, we've constructed one new station, reconstructed 2 others. I've mentioned Chiltern Railways and their franchise commitment to deliver those new services to Oxford, and the specification of the project increased to meet the requirements of East West Rail. Construction of that project started in early 2014, and we reopened as far as Oxford Parkway in October 2015. Construction continues to that last bit on the left-hand side of those plans to make the link into Oxford. Some examples of what we've delivered: Oxford Parkway Station and footbridge. And actually, I can't take any credit for this, but I would say I think we're all quite proud of this, that for what is not a major station, it's got quite a nice environment inside, and it seems to be very well received by passengers. Oxford Parkway Station view along there, and it doesn't look like Sleepy Hollow anymore. It's opened with nearly 800 parking spaces, and 3 months in, that car park is nearly full every day. Fortunately, we have planning permission for a 250 space car park extension, which we started building now. And we have planning as part of the project to put a deck over the entire first 1,100 spaces. Bicester Village Station now, anybody who lives in Bicester will be terribly upset about this. This started as Bicester Town Station, but has been downgraded, upgraded, renamed to Bicester Village to reflect the outlet shopping village here, which must be probably unique for a discount shopping village to have its own station concourse underneath the car park there, a very plush waiting area. Why? I'm told the average spend for a visitor to Bicester Outlet Shopping Village is over £1,000 a visit. And Chiltern Rail, and a lot of those will be foreign visitors to London. So Chiltern Railways now are busy running quite significant length trains on this route, picking up not just commuters going to London, but in the opposite direction at the same time of day, shoppers coming from London to Bicester Village. But it's not just a railway project. I wish I had some statistics on this to hand. I've never quite got a definitive set of numbers on this, but we have built more road than we built railway on this project, if I talk about route miles as a whole, because we have closed 35 level crossings as part of it, and the amount of off-line works required to do that, to divert farmers' tracks, to build approach roads to new bridges, it's really quite significant. So we have built at least 12 miles of road or paved farmers' track to get rid of all of the level crossings on the route. So the route has reopened with no level crossings, bar one in the middle of Bicester, which is really difficult to deal with. We've also had to take a lot of cognizance of environmental issues during the life of the project. We've got a huge amount of noise barrier that's gone in to deal with the noise and vibration for our neighbours. And it's fair to say that if my glamorous assistant Andy Milne had been here, he would have had a lot of tales to tell about the fun he's had with Oxford City Council about the consents for the project, because we've had some very well-informed and very well-organised neighbours in North Oxford to deal with noise and vibration. The other quite significant thing that surprises people is just how much work there is to reopen what was a double-track railway as a double-track railway. But fundamentally, we're not going to do half a job and leave an asset which is going to need a lot of work in the next few years. We were remitted and thankfully funded to give a set of assets that hopefully need little or no heavy maintenance in the first 30 years. So a lot of cutting stabilisation, a lot of retaining walls. Wolvercott Tunnel on the approach to Oxford, in order to get W12 gauge there, we've had to do quite a significant track lower. It's nearly 800 millimetres of track lower, which required the tunnel to be fully underpinned. And then finally, we've heard mention of the environmental constraints this morning. We've had to deal with a lot of environmental constraints on the project. And bats, again, in tunnels is a big issue. We have really struggled getting the licences from Natural England to even alter anything in Wolvercott Tunnel, let alone take out the tunnel, invert, put a double track railway back through it, and probably unique as far as we know, we've got to put a lighting system in for the bats before we can reopen. Essentially, it's to dissuade the bats and to warn them that the trains are coming. So they have a chance, because this is not a roost, this is a bat motorway under the well-lit roundabout that's above it. So it was a big sigh of relief for all of us on the project on the morning of the 28th of September when the first train for driver training purposes ran through. And again, about 4 weeks later on the 26th of October when we had the official opening. Now, I know my colleagues who are going to talk about Borders Rail are going to trump me with who they had to open their railway. They got there just before us, and she wouldn't come again. It was rumoured that we couldn't get the Prime Minister either, but when Siemens, who did the signalling on the job, threatened via their corporate headquarters to get Angela Merkel to come, I say no more. Some lessons learnt from Phase 1 though. Transport and Works Act order. The railway was built under a Transport and Works Act order, and it was pushed through on the basis of a relatively immature design. Big mistake, because not having a good understanding of what we were going to build when we went to public inquiry meant that we couldn't argue the case that we properly understood what the impacts were going to be. And therefore we got a lot of pre-commencement conditions put on the order, which meant that, okay, we've got an order, we've got the power to go and build this railway. Well, actually you can't, because there were loads of conditions which we had to go back to the local authorities to get their approval on. Noise and vibration being the really big one. Another issue was that the contract strategy led to a change of designers after GRIP 4, and there was a loss of knowledge. And that contract strategy also didn't really seek to embed collaborative principles into the delivery of the project. The project has a website, it's called Bicester to Oxford Collaboration. Yeah, not always, which has been very disappointing. And crucially, it's been mentioned before this morning, the absence of early contractor engagement into the construction methodology. But on a plus side, the strategy was always to take the route out of use and allow construction to use greenfield site rules. And it has meant that in many areas the construction has roared on ahead of the sort of pace that we're used to in railway projects. Another big success from our point of view is the earthworks and drainage remediation was specified to modern standards, which gave us a superb base for track construction. Installation of the track was done right first time to high standards using modern plant, and it meant that we could consolidate the railway with DTS and open to the first train at 50 over 80 miles an hour on the whole route, and we had pre-agreed with the route asset managers exactly what the criteria were going to be for lifting the line speed after that, which included having a track recording train booked for 2 weeks after the first train ran, and it allowed us, I think it was 2 weeks and 2 days before the line speed was open to 100 miles an hour. East West Rail Phase 2 then, Bicester to Milton Keynes. We all like pictures, so I can rattle through these. Verney Junction Station. Verney Junction, quite a little centre of the railway at one time, and a busy little station. I have no idea when that photo was taken, but that's what it looked like in 2013. Sleepy Hollow, like I said. To be fair, this is the mothballed section of the railway, I should hasten to add. Claydon Station, also in the mothballed section, circa 1961. Note the level crossing in the middle there. The level crossing still has an order. It doesn't look anything like the order because it's been fenced off and is really basically just a road. Winslow Station. Winslow Station, signal box, junction there. Notice the position of the platform there, because that's what it looks like today with encroachment from development. Needless to say, we are not putting Winslow Station back on the site where it was. We've got a much better site for it, actually, for future growth of Winslow Town. and Swanbourne Station then and now, beautifully being maintained by the two old gentlemen that live in the station house that we have discovered is still in Network Rail's ownership, and we're quite shocked that they only signed a tenancy agreement in 2012 for that. How have we developed the requirements for the infrastructure for phase 2? This is courtesy of Parsons Brinkerhoff, who did the feasibility with us. Fundamentally, we've used an iterative process of looking from the point of view of the design train service specification